welcome to the 9th episode of the Force Geeks, a Star Wars podcast where X-Wing marks the spot, and brought to you by DailySuperhero.com, where you can find focused coverage on movies, TV content, and more for Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Ghostbusters. There's new episodes dropping on Mondays, and we sure do appreciate you joining us once again, or maybe even for the very first time. Newcomers are welcome here. There are a lot of options to talk about Star Wars, and we are so very thankful that you chose to be a part of our experience. Please do us the courtesy of hitting subscribe to help support us. We have listeners on 6 continents now, Jake, and we've actually picked up some listeners in Africa, so thank you for that. And we love that our passion for the galaxy far, far away is going the distance all over the globe. I'm Nate Custer, coming to you from Northwest Arkansas, holding it down for NWA, and I'm joined by my fellow Force Geek from Seattle. It's Jake Scott. Hey, Jake.
What's up, man?
You know what? Talking Star Wars, a lot of stuff happening. I still am constantly amazed, even after the movie, after the close of The Mandalorian, that we have so much stuff to talk about, so much news coming out, and nothing official really coming from Star Wars or Lucasfilm or Disney itself, but it doesn't mean the news stops.
I know, everybody's just hyped up after the movie. You know, we're all in Star Wars full geek out mode, and you know, it's got a lot of chatter going on.
It does. Lots of rumors. And I do have to just make a quick note of some things. We talked about a few rumors in the last episode. I have seen no one supporting what we talked about when it came to Cosmic Book News. Was talking about some different things, including a Thrawn movie. I've not seen anybody else talking about that, so I'm starting to think that's pie in the sky stuff. As much as I would love that, and who knows? It takes a lot. There's a lot of projects that greenlit and then nothing happens with them, but I haven't seen anybody coming out. So Cosmic Book News, I'm a little worried. Might have been kind of out in the ether with this one, but we'll see what actually transpires. But we are getting some really cool stuff coming from Making Star Wars. Jason Ward, whom you and I have talked about a great deal about how there's some stuff I have to be careful when I'm looking at Making Star Wars if I want to maintain some sense of surprise and newness when I go to the theaters to see what we've got coming out. But I tell you what, they are so good at what they do, and we're going to talk about some things they've discovered here recently. So let's get into this, Jake. We're going to start with what we have coming up. Rumors that a JJ cut might actually exist, and there could be a re-release in theaters later this month, or it could wait until the home video release, but there's something to be made of with that. At first we thought, no, I don't think there's a JJ cut. It turns out there might indeed be one. Plus, the new Marvel Comics series of Darth Vader will kick off in February. So coming up very soon, we have a sneak peek at what it will focus on. And Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, has new critic reviews that have, get this, dropped its Rotten Tomatoes critic score down to tie it with The Phantom Menace as the worst reviewed chapters in all the Star Wars movies. But if you look at the fan scores, it's much higher than The Phantom Menace, and a complete reversal of what a lot of people see from the critics. So what do you make of that? We'll talk about it. And a bit more information about those Sith statues that we see with the Emperor on the planet Exegol. Who are they supposed to be? We now know. Finally, the next saga could be set in the High Republic era. We'll educate you on what that time period is and what it could mean for the future of the movies. And if we get time, Jake, Jar Jar Binks. Does he have a future in the franchise? We'll let you know. It's all here for you on The Force Geeks, episode 9 of this podcast. Jake, big week for lots of stuff coming out. Is there something of all those things that has stood out to you that you can't wait to talk about today?
Boy, really all of it. That's a tough one, you know?
I
can't pick just one thing. I love it way too much.
I'm going to break it right down our list here then. So I'm going to get into it. Let's start with the JJ Cut rumors. Now, we thought it could be just wishful thinking, but might actually be true. So we got this covered, is sharing some info that has us a little bit of excited. Me, definitely excited. I know you were like, yes, let's make this happen. They're reporting that Abrams is in the process of trying to convince the studio to release his cut of the pick on Blu-ray, DVD, or at least a longer cut than what we got in the theaters, with a lot of the extra scenes that were removed and have now possibly been restored for this cut. There are those who are saying that it might potentially even be re-released in the theaters at the end of this month, in January. I don't think that's going to happen, but oh my gosh, if Disney wants to bump up the returns on this, if they were to offer an extended cut, which they did with the Avengers Endgame, they wanted it to break the record, so they put some extra stuff in there. It wasn't anything tremendous, and it takes a lot of time to get all the effects stuff done for these movies. I don't know if they have enough time to get it done, but this gets me excited, Jake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they, like you said, if they want to bring up the numbers and, catch up a little bit with some of the other releases, that would be one way to do it, because obviously so many super fans would go running to the theater to see that extra stuff. Even if they knew for a fact it was coming out on Blu-ray, it's like, well, I can't wait, because it's going to be months before we see that. And either way, we need to see it. We all know that there's tons of footage in every movie that gets shot and never used. And, it's there for a reason. They don't just shoot stuff for fun. There's story in there that we're missing out on that I'd like to see.
Well, and you know what? Chris Terrio, the writer of the movie, co-writer, I should say, with JJ, he really went into a lot of detail that there was so much more that he wished he could have done for the exposition to really draw out the storylines, because it is an action-packed movie. As it's currently cut, there's so much to it, a lot going on, and he wanted to provide more background, more detail, so that it really helps set up the rest of the parts of the story that could use a little support. So I'm definitely in line with their thinking that if they could have made it a 3-hour movie, they would have done it. And here's what We Got This Covered is saying. Now, they've seen come from the same source that let them know that Rey's new trainer in the film would be actually Leia, and that we would see a young Luke would appear in the Obi-Wan show, which is now seeming to be pretty true, because Disney is casting for a young Luke for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that's coming out. They also said that Rey is Palpatine's, daughter. So there's all of that there that or not daughter, granddaughter, I should say.
Yeah.
So it came out that we have a lot of information coming from the source that it seems to be actually impactful and true, and that same source is convinced that Abrams is lobbying Disney to release his cut of the pick, specifically on Blu-ray. I don't know about the theatrical release, which would be amazing, but at least on Blu-ray, DVD, home video, longer cut than what we got in theaters, with a lot of extra scenes that were removed, now restored. And again, that's coming from We Got This Covered. So I'm pretty pumped about that. There's so much more that I want explained. So much more.
Oh, yeah. I would love to see the Matt Smith early Palpatine time, back when, Palpatine was a patricide and matricide-loving weirdo that killed his own family and all that. So,
and more scenes for those who wanted to see more from Rose Tico, Kelly Marie Tran. Yeah. So there's that out there, and then it's said to include some footage of Force Ghost cameos from the voices that we heard there at the end. So we know that folks like Hayden Christensen, they shot scenes that were not used. Those would be a strong, strong addition that would get a lot of people really excited. People like me, and that's what I want to see.
Man, how annoying would that be? Like, I'm sure they're used to it by now, professional actors, but to go and shoot scenes for a movie and then have them just not even be used, that would irritate the hell out of me, personally.
I'm right there with you. Because there was so much that people were making of seeing Hayden Christensen come back in as a chance, because we saw him at the end of the Return of the Jedi. That's what George cut him in, looking like that for the special edition release. Why wouldn't he be here at the end? If he's there for the original trilogy, they put him in there, why wouldn't they put him in for the sequel trilogy? And tying everything together with a nice little bow, he needs to be a part of this. And if they have the chance to do it in post, do it. Get it out there. And even if you think, okay, well, the movie's out there, fine. The movie's out there. You can change it. George did it. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you're Disney. You can do whatever you want, right? I mean,
make more money.
It's not like they're short of cash or clout. So,
exactly. Maybe they take a note from George, even if they don't give us this JJ cut now. Maybe they take a note from George and see just how many more buckets of money he brought in with the special editions.
Yeah,
they could do that.
Really cool.
I would pony up the money to go see that.
Me too.
All right, let's move on to our second topic right now, because that just has me hopeful, and I don't know if I can take the disappointment if it doesn't actually exist or actually happen. So I'm going to go on to our next subject. In StarWars.com's exclusive first look at Marvel's Star Wars Darth Vader #1, set after the events of Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, here's what we got. The Fallen Jedi. We're talking about Anakin as Darth Vader revisits the Lars homestead on Tatooine, hunting for information on Luke Skywalker seeking revenge on all those who hid his son from him. We're talking tragedies and images from Vader's past are coming through and hurling at him, and they're actually proving they're always with him as well. And Darth Vader #1 kicks off the new ongoing series from Writer Greg Pak and artist Raphael Ienco with covers by In-Hook Lee. And guess what? This one hits on February 5th, so this is coming very soon. We're just weeks away from it, a little more than a month away. I have looked at the first pages of this, and they've got that for you on starwars.com if you want to see that. We'll go ahead and post a link so you can check it out from our social media as well. Just search Force Geeks on Facebook, on Twitter. That's where you can find us. We'll post that for you so you can take a look at that as well. But Jake, you saw the first pages. What strikes you about what you saw? Because we're back on Tatooine with Darth Vader as Darth Vader. Last time we saw Anakin there, he was younger, he was looking for his mom, and he was angry, and he kills the whole village of sand people when he let his anger well up from within him and take over and drive his actions.
Well, I like the symmetry, and Star Wars always does this, everything is a circle, everything comes back around to, the icons of the past. And the other thing I like is that, like you said, Vader is haunted by his past and always has been from day one and always will be. I think that's just the reality of humanity, but I also think that that's the Force, like punishing him, in a way, like showing him all the things he doesn't want to see to really drive home the point of how much he screwed up pretty much everything he touched.
What's interesting to me, too, is that when I'm looking at these early pages, these first pages, they show moments from his life where he's actually, how do I put it? It's kind of things are juxtaposed together. So you see moments where you have Padme's disappointment in seeing Anakin having turned to the dark side and saying, you're going down a path I can't follow you on and you're breaking my heart. And then you see also this takes place, as I just mentioned a moment ago, right after Empire Strikes Back. So he's had the showdown with his son. He's revealed who he is. I am your father. And then he also has cut off he's maimed his son. He's cut off his own son's hand, and his son, rather than join him, chose to just fall down a huge chasm within the Cloud City to potentially his own peril, his own death. That's the choice he made. So he's feeling pain that his son doesn't want to join him. And you're seeing Padme didn't want to join him and how they put those together from the original trilogy, from the prequel trilogy, and Vader. I'm almost wondering if they're showing the echoes of both the light side and the dark side against each other at that point. Showing him the pain, but showing him that they would rather choose a different path than his, reminding him that this path is not a good one to be on.
Yeah, I think it's really driving the point home of, when you're walking the path of the Sith, you ultimately are walking it alone, no matter what other people might tell you.
That is a good nugget to take away from this, absolutely. And then you see flashes of Yoda, you see Anakin as a young man, you see Luke, you see Padme, you see both of them falling away from him in the images that they have brought up with this. And then you just see him sparking up his lightsaber and the fury, the anger taking over. This looks to be a really cool series. I'm a huge fan of the Darth Vader series. I loved the last one with Charles Soule, who wrote that one. He's involved with another series, The Rise of Kylo Ren, which is providing some very interesting information. Specifically, one of the topics that we will talk about later on, the High Republic, is canonized with this new comic. Marvel's doing some really cool stuff, and I'm going to tell you this right now. With the Rise of Kylo Ren, this series that Marvel's doing, we're getting a lot of stories that I would have rather have seen as the movies as opposed to even what we got. There's some interesting stuff. Who didn't want to see the rise of Kylo Ren, how Kylo Ren came to be, how he took over the Knights of Ren, all that stuff? That is super cool story elements that, thank goodness, these writers at Marvel are doing such a fantastic job of fleshing this stuff out, because that's all stuff I want to know.
I know. It would have been really great to be able to see, what happened from the time that we last saw Kylo before he turned, when Luke was, holding the lightsaber over him, till the beginning of Force Awakens when we first meet him. It would be really nice to see that time and what happened to him, and get more of the Knights of Ren and find out what their story is. That's just one of those things. There's so much story there. It's a lost opportunity. Oh yeah, there's so much story there that Disney is not telling for whatever reason, and hopefully eventually we'll see some of that stuff come out in one form or another rather than just the graphic novels, which are awesome, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I really like a lot of them, and for those of you out there who have the Prime reading service where you can read stuff on Amazon Prime for free, a lot of that stuff is actually on there, and the electronic format is gorgeous. So, you should definitely check it out.
For sure, for sure. And I'm of the point where I know that Adam Driver is such an in-demand actor around Hollywood beyond these movies. I mean, he was in demand even before he got involved in these movies from his work on the HBO show Girls. That wasn't really my cup of tea, but I know a lot of people adored him from there. And if I was going to like one of the characters from that show, he was one of them that I enjoyed watching the most. But he's such a talented actor, has done some really incredible work, award-worthy work at that. I mean, even now, there's so much being talked about his new movie that has been out, The Marriage Story, which is incredibly hard to watch as you watch a marriage breakdown. But his work, he's such a talented actor, I don't know that he will ever want to come back to Star Wars. And that's what gets me worried, because he was one of the best parts of the whole sequel trilogy, and not getting any more of Kylo Ren makes me sad, because there's so much more I would have liked to explore. I know that his character has now, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movies and we're talking conjecture about these sorts of things, you got to be careful of this. So I'm going to give you a chance to go and stop the podcast right now and come. Why don't you circle back here in a couple minutes? But right now, if you see that he's dead, his character's gone, then there's still more to explore in a prequel. I would have loved to have seen Kylo Ren, how he came back. But again, the point being with this, these comics are great. They flesh things out. I love that we're exploring the time period for the new Vader series between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. We see what happens with Vader, and I'm curious to see if we will see those moments where Luke identifies the good in him in Return of the Jedi. In Empire, he's trying to figure out how to come to terms with the fact that Vader is his father. In Return of the Jedi, he's also continuing that journey of making peace with the fact this is legitimately his father, and where do you go from there? But I'd love to see that time period in between to see if the good is making little pulls on Vader during this series run. So I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think that, Vader's a complicated guy, and obviously he's, been on both sides, kind of like Revan was. So it would be interesting to see what's behind the mask, so to speak.
Absolutely. Let's go and move on to our next topic here. And this is what I want to get into, because this is something that's of particular interest to me. And that is, you actually brought this article to my attention, Jake. Forbes has a great piece out, an interesting article from Paul Tassi, a senior contributor to Forbes, about how The Rise of Skywalker's aggregate score, it's Rotten Tomatoes aggregate score, has fallen to tie The Phantom Menace as the worst reviewed movie in the entire franchise. That just doesn't make sense to me. And these new reviews have come in after the release, and it's brought it down. If you look at those two movies, they're the worst together. Both of them, I just don't see how The Rise of Skywalker even compares to that.
No.
It doesn't make any sense to me. And I know the fan scores were relatively low for The Phantom Menace as well, so it made sense that the critic score would be lower. But what doesn't make sense, and I think you have talked about this before, Jake, The Rise of Skywalker, you see a 53% Rotten Tomato score, the critic aggregate score, 53%. So barely better than half gave it a positive score. 86% of the audience loves this movie, likes this movie. It doesn't, the popcorn score way higher than the critic score, and I just don't understand how there could be that large of a difference between them. And with The Last Jedi, it was the exact opposite. The critics adored that movie, ranked as one of the highest. As a matter of fact, let me go and give you a breakdown of all the scores of these movies. So, not as a big surprise, The Empire Strikes Back has the highest critical score at 94%. A New Hope, 1% below that at 93%. The Last Jedi, 91%. Rogue One, 83%. Return of the Jedi, slightly below Rogue One, just by 1% at 82%. Revenge of the Sith, 80%. Solo, 70%. Attack of the Clones, 65%. Then you got the two bottom feeders among the critic scores, 53%, Phantom Menace and Rise of Skywalker. But it makes no sense to me how there's that huge disparity between the audience score and the critic score. And it's not the first time we've seen this, because, as I said before, The Last Jedi had a flipped scenario where the critics loved it and the audience gave it a very bad score.
Well, I have to wonder, and I'm not a movie critic. I don't make money, criticizing stuff. And I guess that's kind of an interesting way to put it, criticizing stuff. That's where the movie critic comes from. Anyway, I think that they watch a movie differently than the rest of us normal people, like the idea of watching it to specifically review it and tear it apart, it colors everything, I think. And I think it's telling that so much of the difference there, shows up between the fans and the critics. Like, the critics love something, the fans hate it, and vice versa. I don't think that's an accident. I think that people who are just watching it for entertainment value are the ones who are going to like it more, whereas a movie like Last Jedi, which definitely kind of stretched the boundaries more, so to speak, in terms of what Rian Johnson did to try to, go outside the box and kind of, destroy your expectations. I think that's the sort of crap that critics like, but isn't necessarily what fans and moviegoers want. And so I think that's where we saw the difference there. I mean, Star Wars is not some LSD-fueled indie project showing up at Cannes, This is a blockbuster 40-plus-year-old franchise. So, yes, there are huge expectations for what we're going to see. That's normal, and trying to specifically go out of your way to wreck those expectations, I think, unless there's artistic value to doing it because of the story rather than wrecking expectations for the wrecking's sake, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that makes a huge difference. And I think that's the sort of thing critics like, because they're like looking for something that surprises them, whereas the moviegoers know what they want to see when they go into it. And so when you get that, and here's my favorite love to hate term, fan service, when they get that, they're happy, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting because this is actually a few weeks old, but I know that we listened to a bit of a clip that was from J.J. Abrams and writer Chris Terrio for The Rise of Skywalker in a post-screening interview that he did in Hollywood, and he actually addressed a lot of the things that we've been discussing as part of the fandom, as part of the news stories have come out about how the critics haven't really loved it. It's mixed to negative critical reviews. There's some good reviews as well, and there's quite a few folks who did like it that came in from the critics, because otherwise it would have been way below. We're talking 30s, 20s, but a 53% aggregate score for Rotten Tomatoes of all the critics, and so obviously there's some good ones in there to make it that high at least. And he addressed the debate about what people wanted to see, and I think you talked about something with The Last Jedi and what Rian Johnson did. You talked about destroy expectations. It's a phrase I've seen a lot, and they call it something slightly different, and that is subverting your expectations.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that is absolutely what The Last Jedi did. It subverted expectations for the story we thought or wanted to see. And JJ and Chris came in and talked about how they understood that was something that people love so much, and no matter what they did, they knew that some people would like it, some people would hate it. And we've got an extended clip here that I want to go and just roll the audio on this so you can listen to them talking about trying to please everybody. And JJ has some very funny takes on that. And let's go and hear what JJ had to say right here.
We knew going in. I was asked just, I think 7 hours ago in other countries, someone said, so how did you go about pleasing everyone? And I was like, what? Like, not to say that should be what anyone tries to do anyway, but how would one even go about it? Especially with Star Wars. I mean, I don't need to tell anyone here, we live in a moment where everything immediately seems to default to outrage. And there is a kind of an MO of just of it's either exactly as I see it or you're my enemy. And it's a bit like magicians. You'd think magicians would all just get along. Magicians hate each other. Now I'm sure there are exceptions, and I'm sure someone will write to me like, "That's not fair, and I hate you," and they'll be right.
Oh, jaded magicians! I can't believe.
No, but it's like it's a crazy thing that there is such a sort of a norm that seems to be devoid of nuance and compassion. This is not about Star Wars. It's about everything. Compassion and acceptance and allowing people to. It's a crazy moment. So we knew starting this. Any decision we made, a design decision, a musical decision, a narrative decision, would please someone and infuriate someone else, and they're all right.
So let's go and stop it right there, because I do want to get to what Chris Terrio said, but you can take a listen to what he had said there, and roll back the podcast a minute or two to listen to that again. But JJ's keenly aware you can't please everybody, and they had to go about just making the best story they could with what they had to work with. And I think, if anything, Jake, when you're looking at how everything's worked out, Disney carries the biggest burden to bear with this whole scenario, because if you're looking for continuity, you see JJ kind of putting to rest this whole thought that he was trying to undo what had been done by The Last Jedi. He sounds very true in what he's saying. I believe him that he was not trying to give the middle finger to Rian Johnson. He says it in that clip. Luke Skywalker learned something when he talks about, I was wrong to be here. I think that's okay to show that in The Last Jedi, and this, frankly, this movie made The Last Jedi work better for me with The Rise of Skywalker. I can go back, I can enjoy The Last Jedi a bit more, specifically when it comes to Luke's choice to cut himself off from the Force and to remove himself from all the scenarios, and then for him to come back and say, as a Force ghost to Rey when she starts to do the same thing, I was wrong. I believe that that was not a middle finger to Rian Johnson. I think he's saying, like, is it not impossible for someone to learn a lesson?
Yeah, I mean, that's humanity. And Jedi are supposed to be, especially masters, are supposed to be ultimately self-aware. You know, they're supposed to get that stuff and really grasp the wisdom that comes with, you know, experience and time. And so, of course, it's entirely probable that Luke would look at what happens based on his decisions and say, wow, that was the wrong way to go, and be more than happy to admit it. So that doesn't, you know, it fits in perfectly to me anyway.
And they addressed the whole thing with the lightsaber too. He said, again, another lesson right there. And I felt it was very cheeky. I thought it was great. It was a fun way to address what had set so many of us in the fandom off, because I couldn't believe the first thing he did was just huck the lightsaber at the beginning of The Last Jedi. I was shocked that that's what happened. And I think that, you know what? That is what happened in the saga. They're not going back and retconning that, but there is a way to address it and have some fun with it. I think that they did a really good job of addressing that. And initially, I was part of that, you know, I hate The Last Jedi train, and I'm coming around now. The Rise of Skywalker is helping The Last Jedi seem more enjoyable to me because I know what happens after. I know what lessons are learned, and so I'm really thankful that while the critics hate that it addresses that stuff, you know what? It works for the fandom, and we're the ones they make those movies for. As much as Disney would love to see the critics love on this movie, that's not who they make these for. They make them to make money, and the fans like this story, and there's a reason why we're reacting so positively to this story, because it helped address the things that made us uncomfortable before.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you say that. I kind of wonder, like, with retrospective, you know, view that we have now from a movie that came out in what was it, 1999 for Phantom Menace?
Yep.
What would it be like now if people were to go back and rewatch it after the whole series is done and then re-review the movie?
Yeah.
Like, how would that change their perceptions of it? And the fact that they reviewed it so poorly back then, would any of that affect it? Because I really think, excuse me, I really think that it does change. You know, you see Rise of Skywalker, and then you go back and watch Last Jedi and even Force Awakens, and it changes your perception of those movies greatly because you really understand the end of the arc.
Absolutely, and you just nailed it, because JJ talks about how one of the things that Rian Johnson did that he absolutely adores is he gave Luke Skywalker a really incredible arc. It was a good story arc, and this just brings that arc full circle to that point that, yes, there are life lessons learned, even in death. I have learned lessons there, and I think that's fantastic. Let's go and check in with Chris Terrio right now to see what he said about his motivations with writing the story and what he was keeping in mind when he's looking at how to bring the Skywalker saga to a close.
Your only North Star is your heart and how you feel about this. I mean, we went into this movie knowing it was a love letter to Star Wars. It was a love letter to the old school kind of filmmaking that inspired George, Republic serials, Flash Gordon, samurai movies, all these other genre references that we love, and it's the stuff about Hollywood movie making that we love. It's the big mythic stuff that we love. And so we went into it sort of deciding that is what we wanted the final episode to be.
So there you have it. All in all, when Chris Terrio is addressing all these things that the fandom and the critics and the news have all been talking about, the media, it comes down to this, and he says it toward the beginning of his statement: this was a love letter to Star Wars. And I think that's why so many of us fans really love what we got out of this, because I felt the love. I felt it coming out of it. I mean, I don't cry at Star Wars movies. I will admit that as a little boy, I definitely got teary-eyed because I was still so young. I was like 4 years old when Empire Strikes Back came out, and Han Solo I thought was dead because the Return of the Jedi wasn't out yet. I got a little teary-eyed because I thought they killed Han Solo. I was 4. I didn't understand what any of that meant, so I got teary-eyed with that. But I didn't cry in any of the other movies. But for this one, tears welled up multiple times for The Rise of Skywalker. There were some beautiful moments and some really great character development that came into play that just elicited this emotional response from me. And I have to say, job well done. If you can get that kind of emotion from somebody, I think you did your job really well.
I 100% agree. There were several moments where I was choked up a bit, and I will admit I get choked up easy at movies because that's just how I am.
I'm the same way.
This one definitely, it struck a nerve in a couple of spots, and I think that it's more than just the fact that I love Star Wars so much. I think that it was just really well done. The stories were told very well. The characters were relatable, and you wanted them to succeed and do well because you kind of had a love for them, especially after all this time. And with some characters that we've seen for so long, Leia and Luke and them, it's hard not to get wrapped up in those.
Absolutely. You know what? It's we go to have a good time. We go to forget ourselves. We go to get just wrapped up in the story. And this movie fit the bill in every aspect, every way. So again, hats off to JJ and Chris. Wonderful job. I would love to see both of them come back to the Star Wars universe in another way. That galaxy far, far away could use both of them. I know that JJ said he's done after this, but I sure hope there's a way to bring them back in. And Disney, give him the ability to release the JJ cut. I'll say it one more time. I'll probably say it more times. But right now, give us that cut. I'd love to see what their intent for that whole big story is. We would sit through a 3-hour movie. Give it to us. We're game. All right, next topic. One of our loyal listeners, Matt Tagami, a good friend of the show, and myself brought up an interesting nugget of knowledge about those Sith statues that we see in Episode 9 with the Emperor on the planet Exegol. You know, that really creepy world where there's lightning all the time, that huge structure, and the creepy throngs of, Sith worshippers that are just chanting the whole time. Well, when you see Kylo Ren at the beginning of the movie come down on that platform as he starts to go downward to go confront the Emperor, here's what the folks at We Got This Covered had to say about those statues, those huge statues that you only see lit up when the lightning flashes. The statues that we see there are the 4 sages of Dwarti, the ancient founders, philosophers even, of the Old Republic, who were said to be familiar with the dark side and may have even inspired the Sith. Can you believe that? The Old Republic, founded by people or inspired by people who could have actually inspired the Sith. Now, this makes Exegol's ruins very, very old, possibly as old as Ahch-To, which we know Ahch-To has the oldest Jedi temple, the first Jedi temple, around the same time frame. So that's interesting. And another aspect of these statues, by the way, Jake, is that Palpatine had them in his room when he was Chancellor of the Senate, and he also had those statues moved with him to his Empire-based abode when he got his new digs, his new apartment in the city in the sky there. He brought that over with him as Emperor. And then also on top of that, this has played out throughout, and this might be one of those neat little nuggets that Palpatine was always part of this, is that the ring that Snoke wears has the 4 sages on the ring. That could be a callback saying even...
Interesting.
Yeah, even back in The Last Jedi. That ring was there, and that's Rian Johnson, who directed and wrote that movie, and that they were laying the foundation that Palpatine, from the prequels to the sequels, has always had a thing for the 4 sages. And so even The Last Jedi, Snoke, who we now know was a puppet of Palpatine, had those sages on his ring.
That is very interesting. I did not know all of that stuff.
It's a unifying theme that Palpatine could have been the grand scheme the whole time, just to drive that point home, that it wasn't just something they come up with at the last second. And I think that helps to kind of just add the fabric to the whole thing, this unifying fabric to it, that it has been the plan for some time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just pulling up the wiki or the Wikipedia page for the 4 sages.
Right.
I admit I'm not as knowledgeable about that. 4 sages: Barata, Faya, Sistros, and Yanjon. Lawgivers in the early days of the Galactic Republic. Interesting. Great influence on the Constitution. And he had, Sheev Palpatine kept bronzium statues of the 4 sages in his office and chambers on the planet Coruscant.
There you go.
Right, then. That is very interesting. Oh, Masameda had a statue of Sistros on top of his speaker's staff. And they have the thing about the ring. Yeah. Huh. I'm gonna have to read a little bit more about that because that's interesting to me.
It's pretty
I know
cool.
that, it's an old story. I mean, the Empire or the Republic had been around for a really long time. So
Thousands of years.
yeah, I mean,
That's awesome.
talking like 25,000 years back or something like that. Some crazy high numbers.
Well,
so.
and this ties in directly to what we want to talk about here as well. And I want to get into where the franchise is headed next. What are we talking about? We know what's happening in the television world, but for film, for the theaters, for that theatrical experience, the THX and IMAX experience, if you have those types of amenities at your local theater complex, what are we going to see next? That's the big question. And frankly, none of us know, but there are things coming out, and I got to give a big up to Making Star Wars because they are reporting, and again, they are very good at breaking this news. The next Star Wars saga will take place in what is being called the High Republic. Now, this setting is believed to be roughly 400 years before any events in the Skywalker saga, so forget about the Skywalkers at this point. Now, this is apparently, as I'm reading this from We Got This Covered, this won't be just a setting for a single film or even a trilogy. And they're getting this, by the way, from Making Star Wars again, as I gave them credit right off the top. And this report notes that the hope is an entire series of interconnecting films will land in this era. So not just a movie, not just a trilogy, but interconnected movies. Where have we seen that model before that seems so successful? Oh, that's right. Marvel.
Yep.
The cinematic universe. Finally, they're looking at this. Maybe this is an area where Kevin Feige is coming in to help. We know that he's taking on a Star Wars project soon. Maybe this is something that he's a part of as well to help lay the groundwork. And this is how we did it with Marvel. This is how we can do it with Star Wars. Introduce characters on their own and then do the team-up movies that are like the saga movies. You know, this would be so much fun to see if they can make this all happen. I am just in love with this idea of the interconnecting story weaving because you have different characters. We get to know them. We get invested in them. And then, we care about them when they're just part of the team in the big movie event.
Yeah, I think that would be obviously a successful way to do it. You know, the Marvel universe and fandom is so similar to Star Wars. I mean, I think that model could be extremely successful. And obviously, anything that gives me more content is something that makes me happy.
Heck yeah! More content, good content at that. And if you have some smart planning, there's just no end to what you can accomplish and what kind of let's say, box office returns you can collect from that. Disney wants to make money. They invested a heck of a lot of money in this franchise, and they don't want to see it just go away for a while with not much of a plan to come back to resuscitate their life of what they see for this movie franchise. And let's talk about the High Republic. You're the educated one when it comes to this era of Star Wars, when it comes to our relationship. I have mostly paid attention to the movies. I get into the cartoons. When it comes to reading books, I'm fairly limited in my experiences, but I know that you have delved deep into the expanded universe, which has also been labeled Legends for Star Wars books. What can you tell us about the High Republic? What makes this an exciting time period for Lucasfilm to really explore for the fans?
Well, I think it goes back to what one scene from Attack of the Clones did everybody love so much?
Yes, and that was definitely when you saw all the Jedi out there being badasses.
The real strength of the Jedi Order in numbers. And during this time, 400 years before the Clone Wars era, there were 10,000 plus Jedi running around the universe or running around the galaxy doing their Jedi stuff. And I think that strength, we see the Jedi at their peak, I think could be really awesome to see. And, I think that would be cool.
Well, is this the time frame where we would see the Mandalorian Wars? Was that this time? Was that the High Republic time, or was it before that, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because the Mandalorian timeline is so long.
Okay.
And, it covers a lot of time. But yeah, I think that this is right around the time. You could certainly stretch this to fit into the time when the Jedi and the Mandalorians were fighting, or the Sith were using the Mandalorians to try to infiltrate and disrupt the Republic. So either one of those is a possibility.
I love this simply because you have the Rule of Two is in effect already at this point. So Darth Bane, who has been canonized because of his appearance in the Clone Wars animated series, this is part of canon. Darth Bane, and if you're not familiar with it, there is always that Rule of Two. Two there are. always. So you can still see the Sith coming into play in this time frame, but I think we have so much excitement available to us to really explore the Jedi at their height, like you mentioned, because there's so many of them. They're all over the galaxy. And on top of that, hey, guess what? If you do want to tie in to the Star Wars Skywalker saga, you've got something that ties through that whole time frame. Yoda was like 900 years old when he died. So if you go 400 years before the Skywalker saga itself started, with Anakin being about, 8, 9 years old, a standard years old at that point, Yoda's a middle-aged being at that point. I still don't know what the heck to call his species. I hope at some point we learn what his species is called, even if it's just why. But he's a middle-aged being at that point. Could he be perhaps, obviously very wise, because if you've lived that long, 450-something years, you picked up a few life lessons along the way at that point.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be interesting to see him act a little rasher about things, not being quite the calming force that he is, and to see Yoda being a little bit more brash in his reactions to things? I think that would be kind of fun. Maybe he's a species, that's not who they are, but we see Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian. That guy, that little guy takes some joy in seeing some things go down. So
yes, he does.
It's an interesting thing to explore. I don't think they need Yoda, but if they want Yoda and want to have that unifying theme throughout, there are worse things to be a unifier throughout the many, many stories they can weave throughout the Star Wars years.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what time frame they pick. I mean, if they're talking about 400 years back versus, 1,000 years back, if they wanted to go back 1,000 years, then they'd be right around the time that Darth Bane came along and brought up the rule of 2 and killed off all his other Sith people that were around at that time. So, and picked his apprentice. So that would be interesting to see. That stuff's been covered in the EU books quite a bit.
Yes.
But the era that you're talking about, like 400 years, so, about 600 years past Darth Bane, that's going to be interesting because I don't remember off the top of my head a lot of books that I've read anyway that hit that era very well. So,
well, then there you go. They can cherry pick from the Legends or the EU and take some of those storylines that were popular and adapt them to the High Republic time if they want to. There's a lot that they can do. I'm fine with the cherry picking from the EU because there's a lot of great stories to be told there. So I'm very excited about this. Also, on top of that, I think that you're able to avoid any divisive things because it's not with the characters that you already know or have an idea on. These are new characters and stories to tell without any muck to get stuck in with what people's expectations were for these characters because you grew up with them. It really is a much safer way to go, and I applaud Disney for understanding that there's other stories to be told. It's a huge galaxy. It's a huge timeline. Go explore it and get some stuff out there because we do want to make sure that we get more than just the television series. As we discussed in our last episode, I love Star Wars TV. I love the idea of what they're doing with this, but I still want to experience it in the theaters and go have some fun. And the grandeur, the scale they can do with the Jedi at their peak, well, I'm into that story.
Yeah, that would be pretty epic. And I really hope, like you said, that Disney kind of pulls their head out and figures out that you can pick and choose what you want to use from the EU. You don't have to throw it all away. And there's so many phenomenally good storylines that have already been fleshed out. Use them. They're already there. And no more of this, BS complaining about not having enough background material. Kathleen Kennedy. Just use it. It's already out there. Use it. We love it.
Well, there are rumors again that being reported that they do have a director in place for this first film of that part of the franchise. So hopefully we get an announcement soon. I'm wondering if it comes after Clone Wars debuts so that they can capitalize on that being a popular time frame to just cash in on all the attention coming to Star Wars at that point. So High Republic, by the way, is canon. Introduced in the Rise of Kylo Ren issue number 2, where we see Luke out with Lor San Tekka. And if you don't remember who Lor San Tekka is, that's Max von Sydow. He was at the beginning of The Force Awakens. He's the one who says this will begin to right everything that has been wrong. He's the character that Poe is talking to get the location of Luke Skywalker. He's killed almost immediately by Kylo Ren. So that issue number 2 shows Lor San Tekka, Kylo Ren as a boy, and Luke out on the archaeological finds that they're trying to find these different Jedi items to learn more about the Jedi. and they have a run-in. But this issue talks about how the relic they're looking for, in Lore Santec is the one who says this, is possibly from the High Republic era. So High Republic is canon now. If it wasn't before, it is now, and that is something that's pretty exciting to see how they go forward with this.
That would be another era I would love to see, is, from Luke's perspective of trying to bring back the Jedi, that sort of thing.
Yes, Dave Filoni and Luke Skywalker, a series in between, give it to us. I'd take the animated series that let Mark Hamill voice that and give us that, and they can recast if Adam Driver doesn't want to do it, because they can show, Kylo Ren as his apprentice as a boy. Recast that role and give us an animated series, 3-4 seasons of what Luke was doing to establish the Jedi Academy and see how things were going and his excursions, which is really a great premise for a story, which is why Marvel's exploring it right now. Give us that series. I would love that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the EU did it, obviously, before the whole, changing of the canon. They looked at that, Luke trying to start up a Jedi Academy and getting permission from the powers that be in the Republic at the time and deciding to go to Yavin 4 and set it up, and, all the issues he had with the ghost of Exar Kun coming and screwing things up for him. Obviously it would have to be different now, but there's so much there, so many cool ideas, and just showing just how tough it must have been for Luke to basically inherit this 25,000-year-old, legacy of Jedi existence with nothing, basically. It's like, it's all you now, and there's all this history, and you don't know a damn thing about it. Have fun, And so how hard that must have been for him and all the struggles he went through trying to bring it back, because I think he really felt the weight of the responsibility of that. So
it's a lot to bear.
Would be really cool.
It's a lot to bear, and I think that would be very cool to explore that, and I think there's a lot of us in the fandom that would welcome that story because it's something we'd like to explore. Okay. I'm going to get us on to the next subject. We mentioned if we have time. I think we've got time to squeeze this in, Jake. What are your thoughts and feelings about Jar Jar Binks?
Jar Jar Binks, the ultimate Star Wars nerd triggering device. Yes. I didn't have a huge problem with him. And as you're so fond of reminding me, Star Wars is for kids. So he kind of fits in that sense. And it kind of goes back to what I said before, now having seen all the movies, how would people view Phantom Menace now? You know, how would they feel differently about it? And, Jar Jar Binks is a clown, but I think that's his role. And I think that he really comes into his own when you watch the Clone Wars, when he saves the day a couple of times.
Right.
Just because, he's got a good heart and he's persistent, and yes, he's clumsy and he's kind of an idiot, but he has his heart in the right place. So,
and we know that he's not the Sith Lord that so many of us enjoyed that theory that he's not the mastermind
behind the downfall of the Republic. Sorry.
Which I loved.
Sorry to burst your bubble.
I loved, and I would have been good if that were true. I absolutely would have been good with it, but they have made sure to down that theory. Jar Jar is not a Sith Lord. But here's the thing. Jar Jar may not be a Sith Lord, but he's probably going to reappear in the saga, in the canon of things. I should say not the Skywalker saga, but in those that are around the saga, in the new Kenobi series for Disney+. So Making Star Wars is reporting that Jar Jar Binks scheduled to appear in the upcoming Obi-Wan Kenobi Disney+ show, and the character will be sporting a beard. So that's kind of interesting. Going to change it. Yeah, apparently he can grow a beard. I had no idea. I guess
Gungan with a beard?
Yeah. Well, you know what? There were characters. Remember, there were different generals and stuff that had like facial hair, like a mustache that hung down, kind of like a Fu Manchu kind of thing.
But I thought that was more fleshy than hair-based.
You know what? You got me. I have no idea.
Kind of like the Sith face tendrils that the original Sith species had, sort of thing.
Okay.
Either way.
I did not know that was a thing either. So apparently he's got a beard. We're guessing it's to show that time has passed. We know what becomes of Jar Jar because of the Chuck Wendig Aftermath series, that Jar Jar was basically relegated to being a clown and entertaining children, and nothing much really became of him. But, he was even shunned by his own people as having been the one that helped usher in the Empire, the Emperor himself, and helped enable that to happen. So, again, this is what's being reported, and from a very trustworthy outlet, Making Star Wars. I watched the videos they post where they're hanging out outside the set. They have some pretty good reports and have a good track record. Jar Jar going to appear in the Obi-Wan series. I don't know what I want to see of him at this point, but let's look at this. and why that might be something to do. Who is left at this point that Obi-Wan knows or was friends with in this time frame? Because he's obviously hiding at this point on Tatooine, away from everywhere. He doesn't want to be recognized because Vader's out there with the Inquisitors hunting down any of the Jedi that have, not fallen from the Purge. Who does he have that he could talk to at this point that he was once even remotely close with? Maybe he's got some contact with Yoda out there on Dagobah, but he's hiding out too. And chances are they're probably not speaking to each other all that much unless they're communicating through the Force, because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. So who's out there that he could possibly talk to? Padme's dead. Qui-Gon's dead. Almost the entire Jedi Council, other than Yoda, is dead or in hiding at this point, if they're still alive by any means. And who's out there? Well, Jar Jar's still out there. That's really about it, though, because it's not like you can call up Anakin.
Obi-Wan loved him.
Yeah. Well, it's not like you can call up Anakin like, hey, Annie, what's up, dude? I was just thinking about you, bro.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
Not going to work.
No, not going to work. So, Jar Jar. You know what? Here's another thing it does. Ahmad Best, we have seen how much he took heat from the fandom and how much it impacted him. This might be a way for Disney to say, hey, you know what? The fans have gotten older. They understand more of how things are. They know that you're a person, and they've responded so well to saying we're sorry to you. This is a great way to bring back that character and perhaps to give it something of interest to do. Jar Jar might be of interest. We're still going to hear that speak because that's how he speaks. It just is. As silly as that speech is, that's how it is. But there could be some interesting storyline that plays out because, frankly, there were a few storylines that I enjoyed with the Clone Wars that did include Jar Jar.
Yeah, I don't know, Nate. I think you're giving people far too much credit.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, Jar Jar is definitely my least favorite character, other than the version of Luke Skywalker we saw in The Last Jedi for much of the film.
Oh, boy. Here we go again.
But I digress. I digress. So, there you go. Gungan might be in Kenobi, Disney Plus show.
Yeah.
There you have it.
Could be interesting. Could be interesting.
You don't sound sold at all.
Well, no, I'm fine with it. I never really had a huge problem with it. I think that maybe we find out that he's like Force sensitive or something.
Nah.
Obi-Wan has to train him.
Nah. That's not happening. That's not happening. No, I don't see it happening. All right.
I don't see it either.
Okay, well, that's like basically all the news that I had for us this week. There's a lot of other stuff that we didn't get to, but we are taking up a lot of time of your day. We appreciate you joining us. And Jake, is there anything we didn't get to that you feel needs to be addressed before we cut everybody loose?
No, I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover today, to be honest with you.
All right. If there's a takeaway that you want to share with everybody, it is this. Jar Jar Binks still lives. Okay, please make sure to join us again next week with new episodes of the Force Geeks, a Star Wars podcast, dropping every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, just about any place that you get your podcasts from. You can see us, or actually you can hear us. We're there. We're there for you. And also, thank you to our sponsor, DailySuperhero.com, and founder Daniel Wolf, who we expect to join us next week to talk about his experience on the newly opened Rise of the Resistance ride at Galaxy's Edge. He went down to Florida at Disney World. It's also at Disneyland. He was just in Florida, so we will get his take on the new ride. He has some very exciting things to say about it. He could barely contain himself when I was checking in with him. We also appreciate you for any kind of reviews you're willing to provide us with. Please give us those positive reviews. They mean a lot to us. And feel free to hit us up with your emails at theforcegeeks@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, so follow us at The Force Geeks. And on Facebook, just search Force Geeks. And remember, if you don't follow The Force Geeks, you're looking for your Star